station, Adventist Reflections. Now, to discuss character building ideas, here is your host, Dr. Danzie.
Hi family, welcome back to this special episode following this week's lesson on Little Times of Trouble. Today we will briefly dig into aspects of conflict resolution. I would like to point out that we will not discuss aspects relevant to controlling hyperarousal at the physiological level. We will also not discuss about dialectical processes. Perhaps we should do an episode on that, on where we talk about practical ways to calm down, reduce our blood pressure, and slow down our heartbeats linked to our anger. If you would like that, why don't you leave a comment in our social media? We are very active on Facebook and Instagram, but you can also find us on Twitter and Tumblr. So, today we will focus on the procedural aspects of resolving conflict with someone else from a biblical perspective. This might be your spouse, your child, your sibling, your neighbor, your co-worker, your classmate, you name it. It could be with anybody, another human being. Psychologist Dr. Heitler describes conflict as a process that causes the person to form negative emotions out of a natural response system. Jesus understood this idea. Well, what can I say? To me, Jesus Christ is the chief of all psychologists. In Matthew 18:15-17, he said, "If your brother does wrong to you, go, make clear to him his error, between you and him and in private. If he hears you, then you have got your brother back again. But if he will not give ear to you, take with you one or two like witnesses, that by the lips of two or three witnesses every word might be made certain. And if he will not give ear to them, let it come to the hearing of the church. And if he will not give ear to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax farmer or a tax collector," some version says. "Truly I say to you, whatever things are fixed by you on earth will be fixed in heaven, and whatever you make free on earth will be made free in heaven." So, here we have four practical aspects to exercise in order to resolve conflict. Number 1, talk to the person in private. Here Jesus said that we are to discuss with others what we are concerned about. We spoke about this idea in a previous episode, that most conflict arises from unmet expectations which aren't discussed with the person in question. Christ knew that if we have something that bothers us, this can be a cause of resentment and an unnecessary burden that results in not forgiving others. So he says, go, discuss the matter. Don't hide the dirt under the carpet because, it accumulates and eventually ruins the carpet. If speaking with someone in private, trying to resolve the difference doesn't work, the next step is to, number 2, talk to the person with one or two witnesses. Interestingly, this is not something that takes place as much as it should and could in today's life. More often than I wish, I have observed severe relationship disruptions like marital struggles that take place in a home and where both husband and wife believe that they are in no need of extra support. The struggles might be even violent, might be perhaps even passive-aggressive struggles between husband and wife. Whatever the case is, help is needed. Perhaps pride, embarrassment, or even ignorance prevent many to seek help of someone like a skilled pastor, a marriage counselor, or a marriage therapist. Some people believe that all I need is to read a good book, a good Googled internet article, and I will apply that and that will help me. But the reality is that having one or two witnesses there to help us who are skilled has a benefit that goes beyond just reading and knowing or taking a course. I particularly observed this phenomenon being more so the case in the Christian circles, where the Christian has an eager desire to cover up infirmities, where the Christian walks with a mask, as if needing to have a facade before the church and the world. Interestingly, unbeknown to most Christians and even therapists themselves, this work of relationships counseling, marriage therapy, was in one way or another described by Christ here. Traditionally, in the Jewish culture, witnesses were not just necessarily silent observers, but also counselors to the parties in an attempt to come to a cordial resolution. We see this formally established when Moses was brought every conflict arousing amongst the Israelites. Can you imagine being the only counselor for a few million people? I cannot, and neither could Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. So Moses' father-in-law counseled Moses and suggested to him to not be burned out unnecessarily, but to appoint 70 elders that could become as witnesses, as counselors to the process of resolving conflicts. These mediators were to address the perceived conflict expectations of the people. Then we have number 3. Jesus says, talk to a like-minded community that you relate to in order to receive support in the process. So, if you have spoken about it with the person trying to solve your differences without a positive result, then moved on to receiving some skillful mediation from, for example, a therapist like a psychologist, then if matters do not improve, Christ says for us to rely on our communities of support to help us out. More than once I have heard in babies' dedication in churches that it takes a village or a whole church to raise a child. Perhaps you have heard it too. Well, today I would like to propose that it takes a whole family, it takes a whole community to ensure that relationships become and remain strong within the community and out of the community. If you are blessed enough to have a community of faith that embraces you, please let them know how much God has blessed you through their ministry. If not, do not be discouraged. Keep going. God has a plan. Of that, I am confident. Perhaps you need to tell them to listen to this podcast. I don't know. How many times? Listen to this. Try to figure this out in your own experience. How many times have you heard the gossip about conflict that takes place between various members of your church? It could be a marital struggle or an interpersonal struggle between different families or friends who, due to conflict, cease to be friends. This happens from the oldest to the smallest in our churches. Perhaps you even form part of that gossip circle who circulates the information around, who listens to it, who even votes in the church board or business meetings about the discipline needed for those involved in such relational struggles. But let us reflect for a minute. Are you part of the communal support to the parties involved in the conflict? Are you one of those suggesting not to just place someone into some sort of church manual-led discipline, but more importantly, the one who brings the idea for a need of restoration to this person, to this relationship in the church? What kind of support do you bring to those in conflict in your church? Have you spent a sleepless night praying for that couple on the verge of divorce? Jesus Christ counted on you as a community, perhaps even as a church leader, to support those who are facing conflict. Now, when even the support received from our community of faith is not solving the conflict, Jesus gives us step 4 in the process of conflict resolution. He says for us to treat the person as a heathen or as a tax collector. Here is the thing. At the face value, when we read this passage, it is as if you are to turn away from the people with whom you try to solve the conflict and leave them alone, maybe even curse them. I have been witness of people and even leaders in the church who utilize these passages to justify their enmities. Some even argue that this support their distancing from their husband or wife because they try to solve the problem but they don't want to do anything about it. The other party doesn't want to do anything about it, and therefore I'm going to just leave them alone, distance, and we are just like strangers in the home. However, we must understand that in this conflict resolution process there is a context, and the context is that of Christianity. That is, in the context of Christ's example, we must read the passage. The factual evidence shows that Christ hanged out with these people. Christ hangs out with the people who actually killed him. The Apostle Paul was very thankful on this, and so in 1 Timothy 1:12-15 he says that God accepted him even though he was a blasphemer, a violent persecutor, and a killer of others, those who follow God. So you could say that Paul was in conflict with Christ, and yet by Christ's grace he was saved. How many of you listening to this episode know how to recite by heart the verse in John 3:16? If you have been in a Christian church for a long time, John 3:16 is a very popular verse for you, and you might even know it by heart. But let us reflect. Do you know of 1 John, the first book of John, chapter 3, verse 16? The bottom line is, if you seek to solve your conflict with the other person in private and it doesn't work, go and seek some help by a third party. If the third party is skilled, it'll make your mediation process a lot easier and better. However, it takes two to tango. So it doesn't take much to see that if this doesn't work, embrace your community of faith. And if you are part of that community, you embrace those in conflict. But if this doesn't solve the conflict, then treat them like Christ treated those who were at the lowest of all moral status, with grace and forgiveness, with the aim of a relational restoration until the day of his return. In fact, treat those who you are in conflict like God has and continues to treat you. I am thankful because God has accepted me despite being a heathen, despite being a collector of sin. Yes, my Adventist Reflections family, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, should I continue to choose so, Christ has collected my sin and washed them all in his blood, and despite the conflicts and the barriers that I have placed between him and I, he is always there to embrace me with his love in action. Yes, today I choose to love God, and I choose to love those with whom I have not been able to resolve conflict also. How about you? Have you accepted Christ? Have you accepted God's love? He has spoken to you personally. He has sent a mediator to fix your relationship with him. Have you come to the party and solved your grudges against him who loves you? Are you embracing those with whom you have conflict and love them like Christ loves you? I am Dr. Danzie, and you listened to the Adventist Reflections Podcast, your podcast. Remember to subscribe to this podcast. Like it, share it, hashtag it, comment, and find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and Tumblr as Adventist Reflections. God bless you.